Welcome to Firing Line. I'm Mike Kinsley, editor of The New Republic. On July 3rd, the Supreme Court gave states the power to place substantial restrictions on abortion for the first time since 1973. This is the second of a two-part discussion on the implications of that ruling. This week, we considered the political and social aspects of that question. William F. Buckley's guests are J.P. McFadden, who is the editor of the Human Life Review and president of the Human Life Foundation, Faye Wattleton, who is president of Planned Parenthood Federation of America, and Harriet Pilpel, prominent lawyer and frequent guest on Firing Line. And if you missed part one, you're just going to have to guess who takes what side in the forthcoming discussion. Abortion opponents greeted the court's decision with joy, but their victory may be a Pyrrhic one. For 16 years, politicians have had only one side of the abortion debate to pander to. The Republican Party, for example, officially endorses a constitutional amendment declaring that human life begins at conception. That would mean that abortion would automatically be considered to murder. But polls show that most people, while unhappy with abortion, generally support a woman's right to choose for themselves. Now that that right is threatened, abortion has become a voting issue for many pro-choice citizens, and many formerly noisy right-to-life politicians are running for cover. Mr. Buckley, both you and Mr. McFadden have in your writings compared Roe against Wade with the Dred Scott case, in which the Supreme Court held that black slaves had no constitutional rights. But there is one crucial difference that even you would have to concede. The Dred Scott case allowed the state legislatures to decide this question for themselves, whereas the Roe case forbade the states to decide this question for themselves. Now, what do you really want here? Do you want this issue to be settled democratically, or do you really want a conservative court to just step in and overrule the legislatures no matter what they want?
Sorry, but you're wrong. Dred Scott said that under no circumstances was it possible to free a slave, because a slave was the property of its owner, and to take that slave and emancipate him was beyond the power of any state. Incidentally, while we're correcting minor solecisms, I was delighted to hear you say that the court decided that a woman had the right to choose for themselves, acknowledging that there were two parties, not just the woman.
That was a grammatical error, not an
The answer to the question is we do want the states to settle this thing democratically.
Yes.
That's precisely what we wanted. We never wanted the court to step in the first place.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Well, with this clarification, since both of us believe that no one has the right to take the life of an unborn child, we acknowledge that the states should have this authority, while we deplore that the democratic exercise of authority reaches that point.
That's right. That's right.
I think you should bear...
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you just said.
Well, I'm saying that if let's say, 15 states said anybody who wants to abort can abort, I would acknowledge this as a democratic right, but I would be as unhappy as I would be if after the Missouri Compromise, 15 states had elected to continue to have slavery.
But under Roe v. Wade, we've had no chance to do this. For 16 years, we've simply been unable to have any vote or say on this matter at all.
And I say that the reason you have been unable to is because, as stated in the various opinions, not the plurality opinion. And I would like to point out, there was no majority opinion in the usual sense. There were three judges.
But
well, or you can say it was 3-1 and 1.
We finished with the law. We're supposed to be on politics
this
now.
opportunity was not afforded those who believe the way you do is because there were several constitutional provisions which stood in the way, such as the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of religion, a subset of that being that...
But we're supposed to be through with the legal stuff.
Well, this is legal, it's philosophical.
Well, the state legislatures are not going to be reading or listening to the kind of thing you're saying right now. They're going to be facing the politics of the situation. They're going to be facing the so-called right to lifers, which I never used, by the way.
But may I make an electric suggestion, which I think would enthrall you both? I'm quite serious about this. You're the president of Planned Parenthood.
I am.
And we discussed a week ago that there has been an evolution in moral perceptions, including in Planned Parenthood.
An evolution of moral perceptions about...
Well, for instance, in 1963, a Planned Parenthood Q&A that was distributed contained the following question and answer. Question: what is birth control? Answer: it is a safe and simple way to plan for your children and to have them when you want them. Question: is it an abortion? Is it an operation? Answer: it is not an operation of any kind. Question, is it an abortion? Answer, definitely not. An abortion kills the life of a baby after it has begun. It is dangerous to your life and to your health. It may make you sterile so that when you want a child, you cannot have it. Birth control merely postpones the beginning of life.
Mr. Buckley, I think it's very, and may we state this on this program so that you will not be misinformed in the future, as I have stated all over this country for the past decade. That pamphlet was not the official position of Planned Parenthood. That pamphlet was written by an internal staff person who is no longer with us. And my understanding, of course, this precedes my time at Planned Parenthood, the person was fired because of the lack of authority to write such a statement. This organization was founded by a woman who believed very
You
firmly...
think Planned Parenthood was in favor of abortion in 1963?
Margaret Sanger was not in favor of abortion.
Planned Parenthood...
Larry Lader's book. He tells us the great
Parenthood-
arguments he had with Margaret Sanger over abortion. She never
Planned-
came around on abortion.
Planned Parenthood is more than Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger started this organization. Margaret Sanger started this organization, and indeed, where would we be had she not took a very courageous stand?
Was she or
and
was she not
said-
for abortion?
Some of us who weren't would be.
Stood for women having the capacity to plan their families. I think that Margaret Sanger
But you're not answering the question. Was she or was she not for abortion?
I don't know what
I don't
Margaret
think she took
Sanger
a
was. I
position.
don't think she
Have you
took a
ever read Larry
position.
Lader's book, Abortion Too?
I have read Larry Lader's book, but I don't know that Larry Lader speaks for Margaret Sanger, who is now deceased.
Planned Parenthood is for abortion now, so may I make my suggestion?
Planned Parenthood is, I think you must correct and not leave misstatements about Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is for the rights of individuals to choose for themselves when they will procreate. We think it is as fundamental a right as any of us can ever expect to enjoy. It is not for abortion. It is not against abortion. It is for the right of individuals to be
So it's
permitted
right,
to be
right,
left
okay.
alone to make these decisions.
Okay,
More
now,
right than
now,
Peters
now,
has ever would have
let me just make a concrete suggestion. Suppose that next year the court undoes Roe v. Wade and says to the states, you can make your own laws on the subject. Suppose then that half the states say you can't have an abortion, half the states say you can. Why couldn't Planned Parenthood volunteer as an escort service to pick up the cost of indigent women who live, let's say, in Missouri, which has said no, on over to Illinois, which has said yes?
I think we would be willing to pick that up if you would be willing to pick up the cost of sustaining the unwanted children, which would result from a prohibition on women
I don't
having free
understand the
choice.
problem.
He's
is,
asking whether you would pay to get people from one state to the other.
And I'm asking him whether he will
I
pay
think
for the children that are born because people don't have freedom of
If
choice.
they wouldn't be born, you would bring them over to Illinois and have them
There will
aborted.
still be some that are born.
The point that Harriet is making is when you put such restrictions, there are going to be women who will not be able to reach go to Illinois, will not be able to avail themselves of the resources.
No,
And
wait a minute.
there's
I said Planned Parenthood is collecting
well,
money
the
for
point
this.
is that I doubt that we could expect your support for this kind
you
of
couldn't.
service. Or
But you don't need my
many
support.
the point is that even if we wanted to do that, and I think the specter of hauling women all over the country
Hauling?
to secure, that's right, taking them from one state to another in search of a legal abortion, it's outrageous. I mean, that really
It amuses me because
is-
much of your propaganda has said in the past only rich women could fly to Bermuda and Nassau and get abortions.
Well, that's
And here
exactly
I'm
true.
offering free trips to Illinois for abortion.
That's exactly
And now you
true,
find it
Mr.
humiliating.
Well, I think it is humiliating for a rich woman to have to go to Puerto Rico or to Mexico, as was the case before Roe v. Wade. Do you see the point that you
People
failed?
went to Utah for divorces, for
The
Pete's
point
sake.
that you failed to
Up until
recognize,
about
Mr.
20 years
Buckley, is
ago.
that you can't stop abortions. Women will try through desperation, through whatever means is available to them. If they are wealthy, they have more means. If they are poor, they have fewer means. And very often, before abortion was legal, women died as
By
a
the way, that's
result.
not 100% true because
I would like
they
to
use
point
that
out
argument on the matter of dose.
As a former nurse midwife, I took care of women who died. It is precisely true.
But that is
These were the
separate.
women who instilled bleach and
Sure that nurses take care of
Lysol
people
into their
who
uteruses,
die,
and they died.
But I'm concerned about nurses who take care of children who live.
And I
rather
took care
than
of
who are
nurses,
sent to
and I
death.
took care of nurses. As a matter of fact, as a nurse student, I was only able to get through school because I worked in a pediatric hospital, and for 3 years I worked 16 hours a week taking care of sick children, many of them abused children, many of them the victims of parents who did not want them. So I've seen many sides of this issue,
About the
Mr.
human
Buckley.
predicament, I agree with you that it's ugly.
Well, that's what abortion is about. That's about what these decisions are
I'm
on.
trying to make a concrete point. Would there be a legal objection, Mr. Pilpel, to Planned Parenthood carrying an ad in a state that prohibits abortion, saying, we will give people who can't afford it a free airplane ride plus abortion services in Illinois?
No, you just didn't make this up. This actually happened. I've been trying to interpolate while you were going on with this brilliant suggestion, because that suggestion was acted upon before the Griswold case, which legitimatized birth control. Women in Connecticut were bused by Planned Parenthood and advertised that they could go to Rhode Island and New York where contraceptives would be available to them, which they couldn't get in Connecticut.
That was abortion.
Well, but even before Roe, you had New York, in which women from all over the country came to New York through great personal sacrifice, and those people who didn't have the means simply didn't get them. So we had some experience with this.
You're being very theatrical, and because you and I know
No, that's
perfectly
precisely
well
what happened.
in Connecticut that anybody who wanted
That is not true.
contraceptives could get them.
No, I'm older than you, I think.
Yeah, but I grew up in Connecticut.
And I grew up in Connecticut partly. As you know, I have a home in Connecticut. It is definitely not true that, quote, anybody could get an abortion that wanted it. Poor women could not go into drugstores. They could not afford the price of contraceptives. They could not go to private physicians. The fact of the matter is that poor women
Your
were...
partner. This woman says any woman who wants an abortion is going to get it. There's no way of stopping it. And you're saying the poor women can't even get a contraceptive.
I'm speaking of not having a safe abortion. I'm speaking of women through desperation
and she's talking about not
terminate
buying
their
a safe
pregnancy.
contraceptive?
I'm sorry? She's
saying
I'm talking about the... an answer to your question about
that
busing.
a woman can't do anything, even under Griswold, which simply was limited to Connecticut.
We spoke of the legality of it. You asked her to speak on the legality.
She said, as a sociological matter, people in Connecticut who were poor could not buy
I was
contraceptives.
answering your question
About the
whether or
legality.
not we would be in favor of subsidizing women from a state where abortion is illegal to a state where it's legal. And I was saying that was precisely the question that was involved in Griswold. And in answer to your question, there's nothing particularly new in that idea, but it's a rotten idea, as Faye said, to cart people all over the United States when they're trying to exercise the most basic constitutional right that they have, namely the right to decide the future of their lives.
Well, if you say it's a rotten idea because it's inconvenient, what I'm saying is that if we're going to respect democracy, and democracy says the people of Missouri don't want an abortion in their states, isn't it better than to endure this coat hanger, a nightmare that you talk about, to provide them free transportation to Illinois where they can
It is
have
not better because the people of Missouri should not pass laws that interfere. Could I ask you something, Mr. Buckley? Would you like to see the people of New York or the people of Missouri regulate the fertility of men? I mean, shall we have some sort of regulation by law that any man found fathering, for instance, more than 2 children will have to meet certain legal certain criminal punishments?
I'm glad to depart from the position of the head of...
Or be sterilized. I mean, it's
I'm
outrageous.
glad to depart from the position of who's the head of women's now?
Molly Yard.
Molly Yard,
On China.
who says that she very much agrees with policies in China where they tell you how many children
I
you can
don't
have.
agree with
Well, I'm
those,
glad
and
you
that's
don't.
precisely
Should we talk about her?
that's precisely the point I'm making. No, we should not talk about her.
talk
Let's
about
talk
what the
about the
states are going to
issue.
do about
The
it.
point
Let's talk about
is
what the
that
states are going
the
to do.
state has no more right to regulate your fertility and the decision you make about your fertility than it does a woman. These are intensely private matters that should be left with the couple, and it should not be the focus of any political debate.
A state doesn't have the right to tell you affirmatively how many children to have, but it can tell you that if you elect to have a child, you can't kill him.
Well, why should it not tell you affirmatively how many children
Well, I
to
think it
have?
should, yeah.
I mean, then it's neutral. Don't we want to see a state that has a neutral policy? If we say it can tell you that you will be forced to carry
As
a
the
pregnancy
French
to
would say,
term.
vous vous moquez de moi.
Well, no, it is not much.
You reduce it to...
No,
Roe
it's
v. Wade
a
was
matter
not
of
a
fact.
neutral case. Roe v. Wade was not neutral. Roe v. Wade was entirely on one side of the
I
issue.
want to make
The question
clear
is,
that-
what are the states
No,
going
it
to
was
do
not.
now?
It did
There
not
are
force a woman
many
to have an
states
abortion.
that there
One
are
at a
many
time, please.
states that have constitutions. It's not only the United States that has a constitution. So when you say this is what the United States Supreme Court decided about the federal constitution, there are many states which have their own constitutions which will say it may be okay for the Supreme Court in Washington to say that a woman doesn't have a right to choose, but it's not okay
I'm sure that's true.
under our constitution.
I'm sure
And
that's true.
furthermore, there are basic principles here. Now, I'm not talking law. There's the principle of the separation of church and state, which Mr. Justice Stevens, in his dissenting opinion, pointed out is violated by a rule which denies the right to choose to women on a non-secular ground. There is no secular ground, no lay explanation for that. It is also, there is also a fundamental right of privacy which has been recognized by the Supreme Court of the United States over and over again and has been adopted by many of the states, and it still exists in the
Mr. I
states.
honestly don't understand you. Are you saying that there are no secular arguments for laws against infanticide?
Certainly not. We're not in favor of infanticide.
I know, but are you saying that all laws against infanticide are secular in origin, or are
Certainly
they
not.
also religious in origin?
Certainly not. There are all kinds of reasons that can be ascribed
But
for laws against
are you saying that there are
infanticide.
no exclusively secular arguments against abortion?
I am saying that. I'm saying that there are religious and theoretical arguments
when you
against
say-
abortion, but
with the-
no secular ground on which that prohibition
When
can
you say
rest.
religion, by the way, what religion do you mean? I mean, you're not saying there go those Unitarians giving it to us again, or those bloody Presbyterians are trying to put their
Look, I don't
morality
know
on us.
what-
You mean
I
the
don't know
Catholic Church.
Well,
No,
and
no,
Orthodox
not at all.
Orthodox Jews.
Not at all. I
and,
think that not at all. I think that the data is quite sure that quite clear on this that Americans really don't come down on religious lines on this matter.
But you really
it
mean the
depends.
Catholic Church.
It depends.
No, I do not.
Well, don't be oversensitive. Are you Catholic?
Yes,
Is that
I am.
why? Well, then perhaps you may be taking this personally.
No,
You
no,
should
I'm
not.
simply saying that
Well,
in the
what
early
we
days
are
of Roe v.
saying-
Wade, it was constantly called by
Well,
the New York
let us
Times
talk
et al.
about-
a
let us
Catholic
talk about
issue,
who
and that's
started-
what you're trying to reinsert in this now, talking about religion.
As a matter of fact, I would not reinsert this because, as I started off saying, the data show, poll after poll has shown that it doesn't seem to be related to religion, but rather how religious or how
Well, then what is
fundamental
this mysterious
one
religion
is.
when you say there can be no secular reasons for being against abortion?
Yeah,
What is
I
the
said I
mysterious
said the
reason?
warning.
What is the religion that you're talking about?
Any religion, as Faye just said,
religion.
any religion, the fundamentalists in any religious group take one position, and the non-fundamentalists in the same religious
Well,
group take another
but
position.
do you
That's
do-
true of the Jews also.
but look, wouldn't you concede that anti-slavery arguments can be entirely secular in origin?
Mr. Buckley, I'm not...
Don't you concede that?
No, but I'm trying to put myself back into 1848 when I think there may well have been secular reasons for it, and I'm having some trouble getting back
Well, I think
there.
that there were economic reasons, clearly, and you have raised the specter of slavery repeatedly over the last 2 hours, and I think that there is a very important distinction between living people, human beings, and fetuses, and to equate fetuses with living blacks who were in bondage and enslaved against their will is not quite fair to this
No,
argument.
I'm not equating you. I'm saying that there are things in common, namely an evolutionized moral
There was no
attitude
woman
toward
that was being
institution.
forced to carry a slave against her will. In this case, we are speaking of women and whether they are forced to carry the development of a fetus against their will. We are not speaking of people who are living and breathing and are persons.
No,
We really must be
No, wait,
very
don't say
careful
they're
not to
don't say they're not living
characterize.
and breathing. You may say they're not persons, but don't say
They
they're
are,
not living or
it is,
breathing.
it is living life, but I spoke of it as human beings who are breathing and who are separate and apart from the womb of the woman. And the question is, will you discard and disregard the woman? There is no equivalent. There is no, you really cannot make this analogous to slavery, except to press upon the emotional aspects of slavery that we all decry and reject,
Well,
to try to impose them into the
I choose to
abortion
do so.
argument.
I
Not
choose
only
to do
that,
so.
but you
But I
can
want
make
you
a
to
comparison.
recognize what it is, not to say
No,
that slaves are the
no,
equivalent of
Look,
fetuses.
there were a class of people who were not considered
They were
citizens, and the
people. They were-
fetus, in my judgment,
In the
and the
case
judgment
of Dred
many,
Scott, it was a matter of whether slaves were considered as property. And but even at that, we were not speaking of any woman being forced to give her life to preserve the status of slave.
You were speaking about a class of human beings who were not considered persons under the law or the Constitution, just as people like me believe that the fetus is a person but is not given constitutional rights.
It's a little harder to see my ancestors the same as fetuses, and I reject the argument and the analogy.
Your ancestors were
ancestors were
fetuses.
fetuses,
Don't bring the racial business.
But I am specifically relating to their status
and
as
so were you.
slaves.
But then,
I'm speaking of them specifically as human beings.
Could we focus for a second on this business of the secular sanction? Because in search of extra theological sources of morality, Immanuel Kant elaborated the what imperative?
Categorical.
Yeah, categorical. And the categorical imperative was that no law should be passed which law would not willingly apply to the person who voted in favor of it. That was his idea of the golden rule.
American's idea of the golden rule, it wasn't his idea of the categorical imperative.
Well, I may have the terminology wrong, but in any case, that was the criterion that he came up with. And that was considered in the late 18th century as a satisfactory secular criterion.
That someone was disagreeing, that someone didn't want the law applied to them?
That's right.
He wasn't that crazy, you know. That would mean that a murderer would come in and say, yeah, I killed him, but I really don't believe that murder should be enforced, a murder statute should be enforced in this situation. So although I killed him, I disagree with the law.
That's just his choice, isn't it?
No, he says that Kant said that, which Kant never did.
It doesn't mean that you can't transgress the law. I'm talking about what the criteria ought lawmakers to consult. And this was the Kantian formula. Now, transposing that Kantian formula to the question that you raised, it seems to me that the critical question becomes, ought the developing unborn child to be considered a figure in the development of this consensus?
Yeah, well, I said before that I thought that there's no question that an unborn child can figure in the consensus, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a grave question as to whether you can counterpose that to the rights of a living woman. As has been pointed out, there are living human beings who are involved in this, and certainly their rights will have to take precedence over the rights of unborn fetuses.
But that's not an argument to people who think that fetuses are living human beings.
Then let them practice their beliefs. I happen not to believe that a
political
fetus...
beliefs? In other words, if we get a law passed in the
but
state
we're
of New York...
talking about fetuses, and I happen to believe
we're talking about
that
persons,
my rights as a woman supersede those as a fetus.
But I don't believe that.
Well, then fine. You practice your beliefs as you see fit.
So
I want the freedom to practice my beliefs and not to have your beliefs enforced upon me.
What if the law...
By the force of law.
What if the law does impose these, just as Roe v. Wade imposed a certain set of laws on the country for 16 years?
As a matter of fact, Roe v. Wade did not impose anything. It gave people the freedom to make these very personal decisions for themselves.
That's the
and I think
distinction
that's really what is central here. When you say to Mrs. Pilpel whether the fetus should be taken into account, I think that Roe v. Wade did take the fetus into account, granting the woman the liberty to decide for herself what power and what importance the fetus held in her situation, in her life.
You forget about Blackman's horrifying phrase about leading a useful life.
Well, I was discussing Justice Stevens' opinion, which you really should read, because I was discussing Justice Stevens' opinion, which you really should read, because he points out that what is at stake here are the personal, individual rights of a class of people known as women who are also persons.
Well, what about other rights, though? What about parental rights, for instance? Would you be in favor of parental right law in which the parents were notified of
I'll read
children?
Justice Stevens' opinion if you guaranteed me he didn't write it.
I think he probably wrote it, but what I'm trying to say is there is a difference between saying you can't do something and saying you can choose either to do it or not. And that is what we are arguing for. We would not impose abortion
How
on
about
anyone.
parental-
We would fight
How
for the
about
right
parental
of people
consent?
to
How
not
about,
have an
why
abortion.
not, look,
Listen.
parental consent is choice. Expand the choice
Well,
to the
let's
parents
talk
of
about
minor
parental
children.
consent.
Fine,
And let's,
let's.
being the mother of a minor child, I believe that the government should stay out of my family, and that I don't want any law
And
to be
I said
imposed.
it would expand choice.
I don't want
It
to
would expand
impose
choice.
upon
If
her.
you, as her mother, decided when she was 14, I think she is now, or whatever, that she could have an abortion, that would be your choice.
Okay,
I'm talking about
I'm sorry,
people who don't
Mr.
have that
McFadden, we're
choice.
out of time. We have about a minute left, and I think we should use that minute to settle this once and for all. Now,
Once and for all.
Harriet Pilpel mentioned last week 99% of abortions take place before 20 weeks. This is before the fetus has any of the signs of being a human being, any sensitivity, any self-awareness. Couldn't we all agree that a law allowing abortions for any reason before that date with restrictions on it after that date would be a reasonable way to compromise this issue? Or do the human life people say an abortion, a fetus is a human life, no compromise is possible?
Well, my answer to that question is that the enduring philosophical biological question will survive any declaratory judgment by any court. If the court says you all of a sudden a human being at 20 weeks and 1 hour, you might say, no, it's 20 weeks minus 1 hour.
No, but a legislative
and it's going to be very difficult for anybody to issue a declaratory judgment. But here, I'd like to just finish the last 30 seconds we have here by dropping a suggestion. That is that many women who practice or have an abortion are really not exercising their own free will, as I understand it, but are reflecting the pressures imposed by the man who impregnated them. He says, no, I don't want to marry you. No, I don't intend to support the child. No, forget that we had that fun night out last Saturday. And she is therefore driven to the arms of abortionists. It would be very interesting to have a survey of the number of women who have abortions because men were, in fact, moving them in that direction. I'm out of time. Has the survey been done?